No matter how strong our faith may or may not be, my guess is we all have some doubts. It's easy to doubt when things happen in our world where we don't understand why hatred and jealousy and hurting innocent people, why that happens. You wonder kind of what does God think about that, because that's not why he made us. In the Old Testament lesson for today, Elijah, who's a prophet of all things, I mean, he's supposed to know all about God, he's looking for God. He looks for God in the earthquake and doesn't see him. He looks for God in the fire. He looks for God in the wind. And finally, Elijah says, God, where are you? And God says, Elijah, go back to the wilderness. Just go back. You see, it's in the wilderness. It's in your daily journey. That's where you find God. You don't have to look for him in earthquakes and rain and fire. God is right there in the journey we take every day. And even Peter in the gospel for today. You know, Jesus is walking on water, and Peter is the rock. You know, he's the head disciple. And Peter says, I can walk on water too. And so he starts walking on water, and as soon as there's a little bit of wind, he starts to sink. Well, if Peter can doubt and sink, and if Elijah can't find God, it's no wonder that we, once in a while, have those moments where we kind of wonder, where is God in our life? You look for God. You look for signs that Jesus walks with us. And then we discover that God is enmeshed in the stuff we do every day. He's in our heart. He's in our soul. He's in our daily journey. Do you ever wonder where time goes? My gosh, I look back and sometimes time goes so fast. But then there are times like with our two families today when time goes slow, like when you're waiting for your loved one to breathe their last. Or you're waiting for the biopsy results. Or you're waiting to find out whether or not you made the team. I was thinking about the Lavendas, for example, today. It was 24 years ago, I went to Colonial Chapel to do a funeral for somebody I didn't know. And it so happened to be, it was Pat Lavenda's dad. I didn't know Pat, I didn't know his dad, I didn't know her mom. And then after the funeral, a couple of weeks later, Pat and her mom and her little baby son, who I just married, they started coming to church. And then she met Jerry about 20 years ago, and I married them. And as I'm getting ready to do the funeral this week, I just realized, where did those 24 years go? You know, how can that happen? And I want to say, like Elijah, that's where God lives, in that circle of life. It's in birth and death and everything in between. God lives in the journey that we share with each other. I hope you don't mind if I reminisce, but I'm getting old. It was February of 1974, and I was sitting in the room which is now the nursery. I was sitting at an old folding table. It was in February. And I was a seminary student, and I was interviewing to be the pastor of this church. In fact, that guy back there, who just moved back from Arkansas, was one of the people at that table. Yeah, now don't, yeah. I didn't ask for you to preach to me, I just said, yeah. He comes to church this morning, I said, Don, I hired you, I'm coming back to fire you. And it was made clear by the church council to the bishop at that time. They said the last thing that we want is another long-haired seminarian to come here, be the pastor here for a couple of years, get his feet wet, and then move on to something better. We do not want that. Well, I was a long-haired seminarian, and I sat at that table, and I could feel the tension because this is not what they wanted. There was a member of the committee who was sitting at that table who at that time was 37 years old. And he could sense that it was awkward. And he looked around and he said, hey, we can't get somebody with experience. We don't have the money. Give this guy a chance. That's all he said. He said, give this guy a chance. I've never forgotten those words. Think of all the people in your life that have given you a chance. Think of all the people in your life who have believed in you when maybe you didn't believe in yourself. Think of the people in your life that have stood by you and forgiven you and walked on water with you, have been through the storms with you. Think of all the people who have given you the second and the third chances to be the best you can be. There's lots of folks like that. Well, that 37-year-old who was sitting at that table back in 1974 happens to be our retired choir director, who this week has turned 80. And I'm going to help him celebrate his birthday a little bit later today in Wisconsin. Whenever I think of Mark, I think of that song. I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. I believe above the storm, the smallest prayers will still be heard. I believe that someone in the great somewhere hears every word. There are people like that. And they just say to us, give them a chance. Give her a chance. I'm sure when you come in here on Sunday morning that you probably have some images and things you're thinking about that you've gone through from the past week. The one image that I can't get out of my stupid head is the image of the North Korean leader standing around with his henchmen, smiling, giving high fives because now they have a nuclear missile that can bomb the U.S. and they're celebrating. How can you ever celebrate because you have the potential to kill innocent people? I mean, we high five lots of things, a victory, a good effort, a moment. But the most important thing is that we need to celebrate kindness. And then yesterday, I went to Orland Bowl, where they had a Special Olympics bowling tournament. And I just stood there in the bowling alley and watched and marveled. It was the last thing Quentin wanted to go to. And he said, Dad, that tournament's optional. And I said, for you, it ain't optional. You're going. And I guess the one common denominator in that bowling alley was that every young person there has a disability. But in the middle of that montage of humanity, it wasn't about race, it wasn't about color, it wasn't about nationality or religion. It didn't matter because there was an atmosphere there of celebration, an atmosphere of peace and coming together and sharing the human spirit that binds us together. Because there was power in that bowling alley. I want to say, Elijah, if you want to find God, go bowling, because it's right there. And Peter, if you want to find God, you don't got to walk on water, no miracles, just come and watch the human spirit at work, because that is what life is all about. A power born of kindness and love. A power born of the acceptance of other people and the invitation to accept yourself. After that meeting, when that 37-year-old voted yes to hire me, he said, Don, I want you to read this book from a Danish. I didn't know there were Danish theologians. I didn't know there were Swedish theologians. But I read this book by this Danish guy, and his name was Grundtvig. And there's only one, because I'm not a very good theologian, there's only one thing in that book I remember. He said this: we are human first and Christian second. I never have forgotten that, because it's so true. How often do we take a particular religion and try to cram it down somebody's throat? But that's backwards, because our humanity, our God-given humanity, is the vessel out of which our religion grows. And there is in life only one kind of religion that matters, and that's a religion born of kindness. Down syndrome, up syndrome, disability, ability, white and black and gay and straight, Italian and Swedish, whatever it is, our humanity is the vessel out of which God speaks to us and where Jesus walks with us. 43 years ago, I heard those words, give him a chance. Well, we can't walk on water. And we may not see God as clearly as we would like to see God. But whenever we take the time to give somebody else a chance, there's always hope. And that's when the power of kindness comes alive and really can make a difference. If you're able to, please rise for the creed. It's on page 105.